Welcome to this explainer. You know, every single night you do something genuinely remarkable. You lie down, you lose consciousness for hours, and you just completely stop responding to the outside world. Your muscles relax, your awareness totally disappears. For a long, long time, this actually felt like a biological vulnerability. But, as we're going to see today, it's actually your brain's most absolutely crucial period of activity. For centuries, the assumption was pretty simple. We thought sleep was just the brain shutting down to rest, kind of like powering off a car engine at the end of the day. But modern neuroscience shows us a completely different biological reality. Your brain isn't resting at all. It is intensely active. It's physically rewiring itself, processing emotions, and deciding what information gets to stay and what gets totally erased. You literally wake up with a different brain than the one you went to sleep with.
So to understand how this all works, here's our roadmap for today's biological breakdown. First, we'll uncover exactly why the brain must go offline. Then, we'll explore how it sorts memories, clears out clutter and toxins, and processes daily emotions. And finally, we'll examine the actual biological cost of sleep loss.
All right, let's start with section 1, why brains must go offline. Before we look at how sleep works, we really need to understand why it exists in the first place. And it all comes down to a fundamental bottleneck in how our biology operates. The brain faces a major physical problem. It cannot process the outside world and internally reorganize itself at the exact same time. Just think about your waking hours for a second. You're constantly taking in sensory input, reacting to your environment, talking, moving, making decisions. The brain simply doesn't have the bandwidth to simultaneously run deep repairs. So evolution had to create an offline state. Okay, let's dive into this. During sleep, your brain shifts into a dedicated maintenance mode. This offline state is when the brain gets to work consolidating memories, optimizing its neural connections, processing complex emotions, and literally removing physical waste. Without this nightly reset, the whole system would just slowly break down. Moving on to section 2, sorting and storing memories. Now we're going to look at the actual physical mechanisms of this maintenance mode, starting with how your brain handles the information you took in during the day. The core concept here is synaptic plasticity. Basically, this is the physical process where the brain edits itself. Your brain is made up of billions of neurons connected through these tiny junctions called synapses, and every single experience you have slightly reshapes those connections. During sleep, your brain actively edits this network. It strengthens the really important connections and weakens the others. It's a pretty profound thought when you stop and think about it. Your brain is physically editing your sense of self while you're completely unconscious. Now, sleep isn't just one continuous, uniform block of time. It actually happens in stages, and each stage has a very specific job. Deep sleep, which is also called non-REM sleep, does the heavy lifting for memory consolidation, hard learning, and physical recovery. On the other hand, REM sleep, which is where our vivid dreams mostly happen, is heavily involved in processing emotions, fostering creativity, and problem solving. Both of these stages are biologically essential. Skipping either one directly impairs how your brain functions the very next day. So that brings up a really crucial question for us. How exactly do your daily experiences transition from just fleeting moments into lasting, permanent memories? Well, the answer is this fascinating phenomenon called memory replay. If certain neurons fired while you were learning something during the day, those exact same neurons will fire again during sleep in very, very similar patterns. Researchers have actually observed this really clearly in animals. If a rat spends its day running through a maze, scientists can see the exact same neural patterns replaying in the rat's brain while it sleeps, only much, much faster. This rapid replay transfers information from your short-term storage right into the cortex, stabilizing it. Sleep literally locks the learning in. Which brings us to section 3, clearing clutter and toxins. Because saving information is really only half the battle. To keep the brain functioning optimally, it also has to delete information and undergo a physical cleaning process. During your waking hours, you're building an enormous number of new connections. But if every single one stayed equally strong, your brain's network would quickly overload. There just isn't enough energy or physical space for all of it. So the brain performs what's called synaptic downscaling. During deep sleep, the brain actively weakens those unnecessary connections, so they just fade away. This leaves only the strongest and most important ones behind. It's honestly very much like cleaning a cluttered computer hard drive. You're deleting random files and cache data you just don't need anymore, all to make room for the programs that actually matter. The brain keeps the signal and removes the noise.
Without this nightly downscaling process, trying to learn any new information the next day becomes incredibly difficult, mostly because your biological hard drive is essentially full.
But this cleanup isn't just about deleting digital-style information. It's also about removing physical toxins via the glymphatic system. Now, this is the brain's biological waste cleaning system, and it's a huge discovery because it becomes active almost exclusively during sleep. You see, while you're awake, the normal metabolic activity of your brain cells produces toxic waste products. And if these build up, they become seriously dangerous. So what happens is a literal mechanical washing of the brain. When you enter deep sleep, your brain cells actually shrink slightly. And because they shrink, the space between them widens, which allows cerebral spinal fluid to flow much more easily through the brain tissue. This rushing fluid just washes away the accumulated toxic waste. One of the specific toxins it clears out is beta amyloid, which is a protein strongly associated with Alzheimer's disease. So sleep is literally, physically, protecting your brain against long-term neurodegenerative risk.
Let's transition to section 4, processing daily emotions. Because beyond memory and physical cleaning, there's this profound chemical maintenance that happens every single night, dedicated to protecting our mental health. And this happens primarily during REM sleep, which creates a highly unique biological state. During REM sleep, the emotional and memory-related regions of your brain become incredibly active. However, at the exact same time, the concentration of stress chemicals in your brain, like noradrenaline, drops to near zero. This unique chemical environment is absolutely vital. It allows your brain to safely revisit and process the difficult or emotional experiences of your day, but entirely without the physical stress reaction attached to them. It basically strips the visceral emotion right away from the memory. This is exactly why a stressful event usually feels a little more manageable after a good night's sleep. And it also explains why poor sleep is so heavily connected to emotional instability, anxiety, and even conditions like PTSD. Without enough REM sleep, that emotional stress just continues to build up. Which leads us to our final section, section 5, the cost of sleep loss. Modern life so often treats sleep like an inconvenience. But biologically speaking, this maintenance is completely non-negotiable. When you bypass sleep, you are bypassing the very mechanisms that keep your mind functional. Without this maintenance, learning objectively gets worse because memories struggle to stabilize. Your thinking slows down, which impacts your focus and decision-making. Emotional stability breaks down because you lack that vital chemical reset of REM sleep. And over the long term, toxic proteins are just left to accumulate instead of being washed away. The brain simply cannot function without this repair process. Every night, while your consciousness completely disappears, your brain is quietly and systematically rebuilding itself so you can think, learn, adapt, and function the very next day. Sleep is not lost time. It is an active, truly essential biological process keeping you mentally alive. So if your brain is capable of entirely rewiring itself, editing your memories, and physically washing away toxins while you are completely unaware, well, it kind of makes you wonder, what other hidden maintenance is our biology quietly performing in the dark? Thanks for joining me on this explainer, and we will see you next time.